Hello and welcome to episode number 3 of the Layton Fitness podcast. So hopefully you've been enjoying the podcast so far, and more importantly I really hope you've been putting into practice what I've been teaching you. So hopefully with the last 2 episodes when I discussed the clean eating myth in addition to post-workout nutrition, hopefully you can start really applying this in the real life, because that's what the goal of the podcast is for. Within this episode we're going to be talking about muscle building fundamentals. And as you can probably imagine, there's 2 key components which will dictate how successful you are with building muscle. Obviously those are the nutrition component and also the training component. So we're going to go into depth into each of these. We're also going to be talking about the rate of muscle gain, and we're going to be talking about within the context of a natural trainee. So if you're a drug assisted enhanced trainee, some of these figures are not going to be relevant to you. In addition to that, we're going to talk about whether you can actually build muscle and lose fat at the same time, or whether it's best to focus on one goal at a time. We're also going to be talking about the importance of tracking progress and then making manipulations to either training or nutrition. So first of all, if we dive into the nutrition component of how to successfully build muscle. So I first of all want to bring you a quote from Lyle McDonald. It says, "You can't build muscle out of thin air and wishful thinking." This is one of the most important factors that needs to be in place for anybody to build muscle successfully, and that is to be in an energy net surplus. So essentially you need to be consuming more calories than you're expending. However, you'll be surprised how many people, for one, they don't track their food intake, and 2, they don't really know whether they're in a surplus or not because they're not tracking their progress correctly, which we're going to talk about that later. Now firstly, we're going to talk about protein intake. Obviously this macronutrient is arguably the most important for both muscle gain and fat loss. Firstly, obviously you need to be consuming sufficient protein. Now this can be anywhere between 2.3 grams to 3.1 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. Now the reason I say 3.1 is Eric Helms published a fantastic review in 2012 where he was basically looking at nutrition and supplement recommendations for contest prep bodybuilders. Now it's important to give a little bit of a caveat here. He was obviously discussing contest prep, so a fat loss dieting phase. However, by consuming within that ratio, by default you're going to be consuming sufficient protein, because when you're in a net energy deficit, e.g. a fat loss phase, amino acid oxidation is going to be even higher. So therefore protein needs are slightly higher in a fat loss phase anyway. Now one of the things I suggest you actually do is find out your maintenance calories. So go online, you could probably find a very basic calorie calculator, and if you essentially just find out your maintenance calories, start consuming sufficient protein. Now the importance with these calorie and macronutrient calculators is, even though they're not going to be 100% accurate, the key here is giving you a starting point to work from. As I've mentioned in some of my other episodes, nutrition is ever changing, your macronutrient requirements are ever changing. However, you first of all need a starting point, then you can adjust your intake from there. Once you've been online and found out your maintenance calories and you've set proteins between 2.3 to 3.1 gram per kilogram of body weight, you can then set carbohydrates and fats within that. Now instead of me just giving you some very generic guidelines to follow here, it's important to note there's some big individual differences between the ratio to carbs and fats. This is going to be a case more of trial and error and then manipulating those targets from there. Now it's important to discuss the benefits of carbohydrate when an individual's looking to gain muscle. So one of the great advantages of increasing your carbohydrate intake is essentially going to allow you to perform better in the gym. So as I'm going to discuss later when I discuss the training section, one of the key primary factors for increasing muscle growth is increasing training volume over a chronic period of time. Now, one of the key reasons why I just want you to find your maintenance calories is more from a perspective of trying to stay as lean as possible. I'd rather you find out your maintenance calories and then adjust from there, rather than starting on a big caloric surplus and then gaining too much body fat too quickly. I'd rather you start with maintenance calories first and then adjusting the intake from there depending on your results. This is going to help you stay a little bit leaner throughout the process. Now, next we're coming on to training. So it's important when we discuss training in the context of looking to build muscle. Again, we've got this hierarchy of importance, a little bit like I discussed within the first and second episode of the podcast when I was discussing nutrition. The same goes for training, and that hierarchy of importance is training volume. So essentially this is sets times reps times load. This is the primary factor I want you to focus on when you're concerned with muscle growth. This volume must be going up over a chronic period of time. So for example, if you looked back at your training 6 months ago compared to now, there should be a net increase in training volume. Now this begs the question about training to failure too frequently, drop sets, supersets, etc. Now I've discussed this several times in some of my YouTube videos, but it's important to use these in moderation if at all. So let's just discuss training to failure first. Let's just say you were doing squats for 3 sets. And let's just say, for example, you went to absolute failure on that first set. So going to absolute failure is essentially where you cannot get any more repetitions with that particular weight. If you did that on the first set, your second and third sets, you're not going to get nowhere near as many repetitions. In addition to that, you may even have to drop the load. Conversely, if you didn't go to failure on that first set and you went to failure on perhaps the last set of all of your compound lifts, you can then see how the total volume would be much higher. Because if we looked at those 3 sets, the total amount of repetitions would be much higher in comparison to an individual that went to failure on that first set, and then the 2 sets following that, the load was either dropped or the reps had to decrease. So remember that hierarchy of importance. Training volume comes first. Therefore, I'd recommend training to failure on the last set of all your compound lifts. However, it's important to note the difference between going to failure on, say, a bicep curl compared to a squat. Obviously, training to failure on the squat is going to have a significant demand on the body in comparison to the bicep curl. Therefore, for the most part, you can take the majority of your isolation exercises to failure on every single set. In addition to that, drop sets and supersets. Now, that's not to say that these don't have their place. However, you need to make sure you're using these in moderation, if at all. Because like I said, it's easy to impede that hierarchy of importance, again, training volume. If, for example, we did, say, a drop set on the first set of one of our exercises, you can imagine how the following sets, the amount of load you're going to be using is significantly less. Perhaps the repetitions are going to drop as well. So just remember when you're thinking about train to failure, drop sets, supersets, any of these training tools, that you're not impeding that hierarchy of importance training volume. So I hope that makes sense. So with regards to rep ranges, it's important to note that all of the rep ranges have their place. Both the strength rep ranges, in addition to the typical quote-unquote bodybuilder rep ranges, 6 to 12 repetitions. Now with regards to the strength work, by getting stronger in some of them big key compound lifts, squat, deadlift, bench press, overhead press within the strength rep ranges, you'll notice a carryover to your higher rep ranges in terms of strength. So by getting stronger in them lower rep ranges, you're going to get some carryover to some of your moderate to high rep ranges, and thus training volume again is going to increase. Remember that hierarchy. In addition to that, some higher rep work has its place just for lactate buffering benefits. Now there was a brilliant recent study by Brad Schoenfeld, actually last year, 2014, where he essentially compared the hypertrophic responses to a powerlifting training routine and a bodybuilding training routine. Now the interesting thing was, volume was equated between the two groups and hypertrophy was exactly the same. Now it's important to note this study was only over 8 weeks. The sample size is relatively small, so 17. However, it just goes to show that both rep ranges have their place within any routine. However, it's also important to note for volume to be equated, the strength group were in the gym for a very long time. It's also important to note the strength group obviously were considerably stronger at the end of the 8 weeks in comparison to the bodybuilding group. All the rep ranges have their place, and you shouldn't be attached to one or the other. Use a combination of both, focus on increasing that training volume over a chronic period of time. It's also important to discuss training frequency. The literature suggests that it's actually more optimal training muscle groups more frequently throughout the week. So again, this goes against the typical single body part routines when you're hitting one muscle group a day or two muscle groups a day. By training everything more frequently, 2 to 3 times a week, this is going to help with that chronic increasing training volume. So just to clarify, make sure you're focusing on that hierarchy of importance, increasing that training volume over a chronic period of time. Use the whole array of rep ranges, the lower reps, the moderate reps, and a small amount on the higher rep ranges. Start training each muscle group more frequently, so frequency matters, and this is also going to help with that chronic increasing training volume. Okay, so how much muscle can a natural trainee actually gain per month? So what I'm going to list out is I found this on Lyle McDonald's site. So this isn't 100% accurate, but I do think it's a very good ballpark figure to work from. If you've got 1 year of training, £2 per month is an excellent place to start. If you've got 2 years of training, £1 per month. And if you've got 3 years of training, £0.5 per month is a great target to aim for. 4 years training, not even worth calculating, focus more on gym performance. By focusing on that chronic increase in training volume, there should be some structural changes over a chronic period of time. Now, as you can see, these numbers don't sound particularly appetizing. They don't seem a huge amount, but it's important to know what's actually attainable for a natural trainee. And it's also important to note that when we're discussing these weights, we're including lean muscle gain in addition to water and glycogen being gained as well. So this isn't actually all lean muscle tissue. And as you can see also, as you get more advanced, the degree of muscle gain significantly diminishes. Like I said, if you're an enhanced drug-assisted trainee, these figures don't really apply to you. It's also important to note these are just ballpark figures. Obviously there's going to be exceptions to the rule. People with better genetics will probably be able to attain muscle faster, especially in the beginning phase. Now, can we actually build muscle and lose fat at the same time? For the most part, to any significant degree, no. However, there are a few circumstances where this can actually happen. So one will be a beginner. By default, an individual who starts weight training will have a period of time where, for the most part, they will build muscle or lose fat. However, this won't last for a particularly long period of time. Second person is someone returning from a layoff. So someone who perhaps gets injured, stops training for a few months and then comes back to train, or even longer than that. This is another individual that can build muscle and lose fat to some degree. The other individual is obviously a drug-assisted trainee. Certain drugs will obviously allow an individual to build muscle and lose fat at the same time. However, within all my podcasts and the figures I've listed above, I'm referring to the context of a natural trainee. So that therefore brings me to this concept of focusing on one goal at a time. Have a block of time when you're focusing on muscle gain. Have a block of time when you're focusing on fat loss. Obviously, over the muscle gain period, you're going to be focusing on increasing that training volume over a period of time, gradually increasing calories. Whereas in the fat loss phase, you're going to be doing the opposite. You're going to be trying to hold on to as much volume as possible, hold on to as much strength, and slowly decrease calories or increase expenditure via cardio. So that's an important thing, because you'll find a lot of people, they seem to fluctuate between the two without actually achieving anything. It's important to note over a muscle gain phase, there will be some degree of fat gain. It's more of a case of trying to minimize this as much as possible. So that's just an important consideration. Prepare that. You really want to be focusing on several months of training. If you're very advanced, you almost want to have 6 to 8 months of focusing on muscle gain before you transition to fat loss. You'll be surprised. This is a slow process, especially as you get more advanced. So one of the key principles I want to impress upon you is this concept of tracking progress. Without tracking progress, you really don't know what you're doing, in addition to are you actually achieving those weight targets every single month. So first thing, start tracking your calories. If you download MyFitnessPal onto your phone, it's a free application. Start tracking your food intake. However, there's a big caveat here. Don't follow the generic MyFitnessPal figures. They're based on government guidelines. Protein's way too low. But you can edit these starting figures, then start tracking your food intake. Another thing, start tracking your strength. Bring a notepad to the gym. Start tracking all of your lifts. You want to be focusing on adding more weight to the bar on all of your big compound lifts and your isolation work. You can also track total volume as well. So sets times reps times load. Work out the total volume of the session, and this should be going up over an extended period of time. Another thing, start measuring your body weight, your body fat percentage if you've got access to this. Photos, you can also measure girth measurements using a tape measure around your chest, shoulders, arms, around your stomach, legs, etc. Then you can see the degree of fat gain you're getting as well as how much muscle gain you're getting as well. It's also important to talk about deload. So a deload week is essentially like taking one step back. In a sense, you're allowing your body to fully recover before you start ramping up the weights again. So as you get more advanced, you're going to need more deload. So ballpark guidelines are as follow. Don't train to failure during this week. Drop the loads to about 60 to 70% of what you were using prior to the deload week. I'd also drop the volume a little bit as well, so you could drop a set on all of your exercises. So for example, if you were in 3 sets, you could drop that to 2, and then after this week you're going to then start ramping the weights up again. Now there's a bit of debate whether to use an auto-regulation approach, which essentially when you deload if and when required, or a scheduled deload. Both have their place, both have pros and cons. My suggestion is use a deload at some point, whether you're doing that once you've reached a plateau for a couple of weeks, or whether you're scheduling that in every 4th week, every 6th week, every 8th week, or even every 12th week if you are a beginner. So just to clarify, practical applications and conclusions. Calculate your maintenance calories. Set protein within the figures I've given, so 2.3 to 3.1 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. Set your carbohydrates and fats to suit your preference. With regards to your training, focus on that chronic increase in training volume. Start measuring your progress, so strength, volume, body weight, and then you're focusing on this end goal, these end targets I've given you above. So 1 year of training, £2 per month, 2 years of training, £1 per month, 3 years of training, £0.5 per month, and then 4 years of training, focus on that gym performance, focusing on increasing that training volume. Then if these goals are not achieved on a weekly, monthly basis, that's when you can start manipulating calories. So great ballpark figures to increase calories by 5 to 10% when you've reached a weight gain plateau. Protein's going to stay pretty much the same, and carbohydrates is going to be the main macronutrient you're increasing. You can increase a little bit of fat as well. However, carbohydrates is going to be the main macronutrient you're going to focus on. Then it's just a case of patience and hard work, focusing on that block of time when you're going to build muscle, have the monthly goal set in place, and start taking action. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I know we've discussed a lot of topics. Thank you very much for listening. If you're still yet to download my free ebook, How to Set Up a Nutrition Plan, if you go to my website, jameslaytonfitness.co.uk, you'll see a tab at the top of the page that says free ebook. If you type in your name and email address there, and I'll have that sent to you immediately. So this is actually going to teach you how to set protein, carbohydrates, fat. So this will be very useful to someone looking to build muscle and or lose body fat, because I teach you how to make manipulations within there to move you to your muscle gain or fat loss goals. So thank you very much for listening. I will look forward to speaking to you next week. Take care.